Welcome to LGBT Stories, where we share emotional, romantic, and sometimes heart-wrenching tales from the LGBT community. Today's story is one that will leave you on the edge of your seat. Imagine finishing a long day of practice, heading to the locker room, and having your straight best friend surprise you with a confession that changes everything. This is a story about friendship, unexpected feelings, and the courage to be honest with ourselves and each other. Let's dive into my straight best friend's unexpected confession in the locker room. That night, when my straight best friend surprised me in the locker room, something so unexpected happened that it will remain etched in my memory forever. It was about a month ago, a night like any other, or so I thought. I had just finished an intense basketball practice, the kind that leaves your body sore, but your mind clear. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly above the empty gym as I grabbed my water bottle and towel, preparing to hit the showers. Most of the guys had already left, but my best friend was still lingering, as he often did. He was the kind of guy everyone wanted to be friends with, tall, broad-shouldered, and effortlessly cool. He carried himself with a confidence that made him the center of attention wherever he went. His laugh was infectious, his smile disarming, and his hazel eyes had a way of making you feel like the only person in the room. We've been inseparable since middle school, and over the years, I'd grown used to his teasing, his easy charm, and the way he could make even the most boring moments feel exciting. But lately, things had started to feel different, at least for me. That night, as we walked toward the locker room, he was his usual self, cracking jokes, tossing his towel over his shoulder, and talking about the game. "You've been holding out on me, man," he said, grinning as he nudged me with his elbow. "That shot you made in the third quarter was pure magic." I shrugged, trying to downplay it. "Just lucky, I guess." "Yeah, right," he smirked. "You've got skills, and you know it." For a moment, his gaze lingered on mine just a little longer than usual, and my stomach did a somersault, but I quickly looked away, focusing on the row of lockers ahead. The locker room was quiet, the hum of the air conditioning the only sound as we stepped inside. The familiar smell of sweat and body spray hung in the air, and I felt a sense of comfort in the routine. He tossed his bag onto the bench and started pulling off his jersey, his muscles flexing with emotion. I busied myself with my own locker, trying to keep my thoughts in check, but no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't ignore the way my heart raced whenever he was around. It was stupid, I told myself. He was my best friend, and he was straight. End of story. Or so I thought. He broke the silence as he rummaged through his bag. "Hey, you good? You've been kind of quiet lately." I hesitated, not sure how to answer. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just tired." He gave me a skeptical look. "You've been tired all week. What's really going on?" "It's nothing," I said quickly, avoiding his gaze. He didn't let it go. "Come on, man. We've known each other too long for you to pull that crap on me. If something's bothering you, just say it." I swallowed hard, my hands gripping the edge of my locker. How could I possibly explain what I was feeling without ruining everything? "It's not a big deal," I said finally, forcing a smile. "Just stuff on my mind." He didn't look convinced, but he didn't press further. Instead, he shrugged and headed toward the showers, pulling his shirt over his head as he went. "Suit yourself, but if you want to talk, you know where to find me." I watched him go, my heart pounding in my chest. The steam from the showers began to fill the air, and I knew I needed to get a grip. This was my best friend. Whatever feelings I had, I needed to bury them and move on. But then it happened. "Hey," he called out, his voice echoing through the locker room. "Can you grab me a towel? I forgot to bring one in here." I froze, my breath catching in my throat. Yeah, sure." Grabbing a clean towel from the pile, I hesitated for a moment before making my way toward the showers. The sound of running water grew louder as I approached, steam swirling around me and making the air feel thick and heavy. The door to the shower area was slightly ajar, and I could see his silhouette through the frosted glass. My heart raced as I stepped closer, the towel clutched tightly in my hand. "Just leave it by the door," he said, his voice casual. But instead of leaving, I stood there rooted to the spot. The heat, the steam, the tension, it was all too much. I tried to shake it off, to remind myself that this was normal, that we'd been in locker rooms together 100 times before, but this time it felt different. "Dude, you okay?" His voice broke through my thoughts, and I realized I hadn't moved. "Yeah, sorry," I stammered, stepping closer and holding out the towel. The glass door slid open just enough for him to reach out. His arms, slick with water, brushed against mine as his hand took the towel. I felt a jolt of electricity shoot through me, and my breath caught. "Thanks," he said, his tone softer now. His gaze met mine through the steam, and for a moment, neither of us moved. There was something in his eyes, something I couldn't quite place. It wasn't the teasing grin I was used to, or the casual confidence he always carried. It was curious, searching. "You've been acting weird lately," he said, his voice quieter now. "Is there something you're not telling me?" I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came out. The truth was on the tip of my tongue, but I couldn't bring myself to say it. Then, to my surprise, he stepped out of the shower, the towel draped loosely around his waist. His wet hair clung to his forehead, and droplets of water trailed down his chest. "Look," he said, his tone serious now. "If something's going on, just tell me. You don't have to keep it to yourself." The tension in the air was palpable, the unspoken words hanging between us like a weight. My heart pounded in my chest, and I knew that whatever happened next would change everything. The air in the locker room seemed to grow thicker, heavier, as he stood there, water dripping from his hair, the towel resting precariously on his hips. He was looking at me with an intensity I'd never seen before, his usual carefree expression replaced with something far more serious. I tried to keep my eyes on his face, but it was impossible not to notice the way the light caught the water running down his chest, tracing the lines of his muscles. I swallowed hard, gripping the edge of the bench behind me for support. "It's nothing," I managed, my voice shaky and barely audible. He raised an eyebrow, his lips quirking into a half-smile, though there was still concern in his eyes. "You're a terrible liar. You know that." I opened my mouth to protest, but he held up a hand, stopping me. "No, don't even try. I've known you way too long to buy whatever you're selling." My stomach twisted into knots as he took a step closer. The faint scent of his body wash mixed with the lingering heat from the shower. "You're always so chill," he continued, his voice soft but insistent. "But lately, you've been different, distant, and I don't get it. Did I do something wrong?" "No," I said quickly, the word bursting out of me before I could stop it. "You didn't do anything wrong. It's not you. I swear." "Then what is it?" he asked, taking another step closer. There was a vulnerability in his tone now, a quiet plea for an answer I wasn't ready to give. I looked away, my pulse racing as I tried to find the right words. How could I possibly explain this without ruining everything? He was my best friend, my straight best friend. Telling him the truth would only make things awkward, wouldn't it? But before I could come up with an excuse, he sighed, running a hand through his wet hair. "You're killing me here, man," he said, his voice laced with frustration. "Just tell me what's going on. Whatever it is, I can handle it. I'm your best friend." I hesitated, my heart pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it. Every instinct told me to keep quiet, to bury my feelings and move on. But the look in his eyes, the genuine concern, the unwavering patience, made it impossible to lie. Taking a deep breath, I finally met his gaze. "It's not you," I said quietly, my voice trembling. "It's me." His brow furrowed, confusion flickering across his face. "What do you mean?" I hesitated, my chest tightening as the weight of my unspoken feelings pressed down on me. "I mean, I've been feeling things I shouldn't," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. He didn't say anything at first, his expression unreadable. The silence stretched on, heavy and suffocating, and I braced myself for the worst. But then, to my surprise, his lips twitched into a small smile. "Feeling things you shouldn't, huh?" he said, his tone light, but not mocking. "Care to elaborate?" I stared at him, my mouth dry and my mind racing. "I like you," I said finally, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. "More than I should. And I know it's wrong. I know you're straight, but I can't help it." The confession hung in the air between us, raw and vulnerable, and I felt my cheeks burn with embarrassment. I couldn't believe I'd actually said it. He blinked, his expression unreadable as he processed my words. "You like me," he repeated, his voice softer now. "Yes," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I like you. A lot. And I've been trying to hide it because I didn't want to mess up our friendship. I trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. The weight of the moment was too much, and I couldn't bring myself to look at him. But then he did something I didn't expect. He reached out his hand, resting it lightly on my shoulder. "Hey," he said softly, his touch grounding me. "It's okay." I looked up at him, startled by the gentleness in his voice. "What? It's okay?" he repeated, his lips curling into a small, reassuring smile. "You're allowed to feel how you feel, and I'm not mad, if that's what you're worried about." Relief washed over me, but it was quickly replaced by confusion. "You're not mad? Why would I be mad?" he asked, his tone genuinely curious. "You're my best friend, and if you feel this way, well, it doesn't change the fact that I care about you." My heart ached at his words, a mixture of gratitude and longing swelling in my chest. I didn't want to make things weird," I said, my voice trembling. He chuckled softly, his hand giving my shoulder a gentle squeeze. "Things were already weird," he said, his smile turning playful. "But I think that's just how we roll." I couldn't help but laugh. The tension in the air eased slightly, but then he stepped closer, his expression growing serious again. "You should have told me sooner," he said quietly. "I don't want you to feel like you have to hide stuff from me." I admitted, my voice barely audible. "I was scared of how you'd react, scared of losing you." His eyes softened, and he shook his head. "You're not going to lose me," he said firmly. "I promise." The weight of his words settled over me, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe again. But then he did something that left me completely speechless. He reached out his hand, brushing against mine before intertwining our fingers. "I don't know what this means," he said softly, his voice steady but uncertain. "But I'm not opposed to figuring it out." My breath caught in my throat, my heart pounding as I looked into his eyes. "Are you saying?" "I'm saying I care about you," he interrupted gently. "And maybe there's more to this than I realized." The honesty in his voice took my breath away, and I felt a surge of hope I hadn't dared to entertain. Could this really be happening? Could my best friend, the person I'd loved in silence for so long, actually feel the same way? The silence in the locker room was thick, almost suffocating. His fingers were still intertwined with mine, a gesture that felt both grounding and electrifying. I searched his face, looking for any hint that he might be second-guessing what he just said, but his expression was calm, steady, and filled with an openness I hadn't seen before. "You're serious?" I asked, my voice trembling. He smiled, that boyish, carefree grin I knew so well, softening the tension in the room. "Yeah, I'm serious," he said. "I wouldn't say it if I wasn't." His honesty left me speechless, and for a moment, all I could do was stand there, my mind racing as I tried to process everything. But then he stepped closer, his hand releasing mine only to rest gently on my shoulder. "Look, I get that this is a lot," he said softly, "but we've been through everything together. You're my best friend, and that's not going to change. So whatever this is, whatever it becomes, I want us to figure it out together." "Okay." I nodded, my throat tight, as I fought back the overwhelming emotions threatening to spill over. "Okay." I managed, my voice barely audible. His smile widened, and he gave my shoulder a reassuring squeeze before stepping back slightly. "Good," he said, his tone lighter now. "Because honestly, I've been trying to figure out why I've been feeling so weird around you lately. I guess this explains it." I stared at him, my jaw dropping slightly. "You've been feeling weird?" I asked, my voice tinged with disbelief. He chuckled, rubbing the back of his neck in that nervous way he always did when he was embarrassed. "Yeah," he admitted. "I mean, I didn't really know what it was, but I catch myself looking at you differently, thinking about you more than I probably should. And I kept telling myself it was nothing." He trailed off, his gaze meeting mine again. But it wasn't nothing. His confession left me breathless, and I felt a warmth spread through my chest that I couldn't quite describe. For so long, I convinced myself that my feelings were one-sided, that he could never see me as anything more than a friend. But now, standing here with him, everything felt different. "Hey," I said softly, my voice trembling. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," he replied, his tone gentle. I want to be honest with you. You've always been honest with me, and I owe you the same." I nodded, my heart swelling with gratitude and something deeper, something I hadn't dared to hope for until now. "Thank you," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "For being honest. For not freaking out." He grinned, his eyes sparkling with that familiar mischief. "Hey, you know me. I am unshakable." I couldn't help but laugh. The tension in the room eased slightly as his humor cut through the weight of the moment. But even as we shared that brief moment of levity, the air between us remained charged, filled with an unspoken question that neither of us was brave enough to voice. And then, as if drawn by some invisible force, he stepped closer again. This time, there was no hesitation in his movements, no uncertainty in his gaze. He reached out his hand, brushing lightly against my arm before sliding down to take my hand in his once more. "I don't want to overthink this," he said quietly, his voice steady but soft. "I just want to see where it goes. Is that okay?" I swallowed hard, my heart pounding as I nodded. "Yeah," I said, my voice trembling with emotion. "That's okay." He smiled, a small, genuine smile that made my chest ache with how much I cared about him. And then, without warning, he leaned in, his forehead resting lightly against mine as his eyes searched mine for any sign of doubt. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. The world outside the locker room faded away, leaving only the two of us in this small, private space. I could feel the warmth of his breath against my skin, the steady beat of his heart in the space between us. It was both exhilarating and terrifying all at once. And then he kissed me. The moment his lips met mine, it was like a switch flipped in my brain, silencing every doubt, every fear, every nagging voice that told me this was a bad idea. His touch was gentle at first, almost hesitant, as if he was giving me the chance to pull away. But when I leaned into him, my hands gripping his arms for support, he deepened the kiss. His movements grew more confident, more sure. It was everything I'd ever imagined and more. The warmth of his skin, the softness of his lips, the way his hands settled on my waist as he pulled me closer. It all felt so natural, so right, like this was exactly where I was meant to be. When we finally broke apart, both of us breathing hard, he rested his forehead against mine again, his eyes closed as he caught his breath. "Wow," he murmured, a small laugh escaping his lips. "That was amazing." I finished for him, my own voice barely above a whisper. "Yeah, amazing." We stood there for a moment longer, the silence between us filled with the sound of our breathing and the distant hum of the locker room lights. In that moment, I knew that everything had changed. Whatever this was, whatever it became, there was no going back. And the craziest part was that this was only the beginning. Because as his forehead rested lightly against mine, neither of us wanted to move too far away. The air between us felt electric, charged with something unspoken yet undeniable. It wasn't just curiosity anymore. This was something deeper, something that neither of us fully understood but couldn't resist exploring. His hands slid down from my waist, resting lightly on my hips as his thumbs brushed over the fabric of my shirt. It was such a subtle gesture, but it sent a wave of heat through me, making it impossible to think about anything else. I met his gaze, my breath catching at the intensity in his eyes. They were soft but searching, as if he was looking for reassurance, for confirmation that this was what we both wanted. "Are you okay?" he asked softly, his voice steady but carrying an edge of vulnerability that made my chest tighten. I nodded, swallowing hard. "Yeah," I managed, my voice barely above a whisper. "Are you?" His lips quirked into a small smile, and he let out a quiet laugh. "I don't know," he admitted, his hands tightening slightly on my hips. "But I think that's okay." There was a moment of silence, the kind that felt heavy but not uncomfortable, as if the air itself was holding its breath. And then, as if on some unspoken agreement, we both moved at the same time. His lips found mine again, and this time, there was no hesitation, no uncertainty. The kiss was deeper, more intense, and I felt myself melting into him. My hands found their way to his shoulders as I held on to him, like he was the only thing keeping me grounded. His hand slid up my back, his touch firm but gentle, and I shivered at the sensation. My heart raced in my chest as the weight of his body pressed against mine, guiding me backward until my back met the cool metal of the lockers. The contrast between the cold surface and the warmth of his touch sent another jolt of electricity through me, making it impossible to focus on anything but him. He pulled back just enough to look at me, his chest heaving as he caught his breath. "Tell me if this is too much," he said quietly, his voice low and steady. "I don't want to push you into anything you're not ready for." I shook my head, my fingers curling into the fabric of his shirt. "You're not," I said, my voice trembling but certain. "I want this." His smile softened, and he leaned in again, his lips brushing against mine in a way that was both tender and urgent. His hands found their way to my waist, slipping under my shirt just enough to rest against my skin. The warmth of his touch sent a shiver down my spine, and I felt myself leaning into him, craving the connection, the closeness. For a moment, it felt like time had stopped. The world outside the locker room faded away until there was nothing left but the two of us. His hands roamed my back, his touch careful and exploratory, as if he was memorizing every inch of me. Eventually, he slowly moved lower, and my own hands moved instinctively, sliding up to tangle in his hair as I pulled him closer, unwilling to let go of the moment. "God," I murmured, my voice rough with emotion. "You're incredible. You deserve it," he replied, the sincerity in his voice making my chest ache. I felt a warmth spread through me that had nothing to do with the heat of the moment. When he finished, he moved up and pulled back slightly, just enough to rest his forehead against mine again. His hand stayed on my waist, his thumbs tracing slow circles against my skin. "I don't know what's happening right now," he admitted, his voice soft but steady. "But I don't want it to stop." "Me neither," I said, my breath catching as his gaze locked onto mine. "I don't think I've ever wanted anything more." The intensity in his eyes deepened, and for a moment, I thought he might say something else. But instead, he leaned in again, his lips capturing mine in another kiss that was slower, more deliberate. This time, there was a tenderness to his movements, a quiet kind of passion that made my chest feel tight with emotion. His hands moved lower, his touch still careful, still exploratory. I felt myself responding instinctively, my body arching toward him as I let myself get lost in the moment. The feel of his hands on my skin, the warmth of his breath against my cheek, the way his body fit so perfectly against mine. It was almost too much and yet not enough all at once. As the moments stretched on, the tension between us only grew. The boundaries between friendship and something more blurred with every passing second. And yet, despite the intensity of the moment, there was something grounding about the way he held me, the way his touch never strayed too far, as if he was making sure I felt safe, secure. Eventually, he pulled back again, his breathing heavy as he rested his forehead against mine once more. "We should probably stop," he said softly, though his hands didn't move from my waist. "Yeah," I agreed, though the word felt hollow even as I said it. Neither of us moved. The pull between us was too strong to break just yet. His lips brushed against my forehead, a soft, almost absent-minded gesture that made my chest ache. "I don't know what this means," he admitted quietly, "but I want to figure it out with you." I nodded, my throat tight with emotion. "Me too." For a moment, we just stood there, our bodies still pressed close. The silence between us was filled with unspoken promises and the quiet hum of the locker room lights. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't clear where this would lead, but in that moment, none of it mattered. All that mattered was that we were here together, and that for the first time, it felt like everything was exactly as it should be. We stayed there, pressed against each other, the cool metal lockers behind me, a stark contrast to the heat radiating between us. It was as though the world outside the locker room had ceased to exist, leaving only the sound of our breathing and the hum of fluorescent lights to fill the air. His hands still rested gently on my waist, his thumbs tracing soothing circles over my skin, like he was trying to memorize every detail of this moment. His gaze searched mine, a soft but unspoken question lingering in his eyes. "Are you okay?" he asked again, his voice barely above a whisper, yet filled with so much care that it made my chest tighten. I am, I said, my voice just as soft. Are you? His lips quirked into a small, almost shy smile. Yeah, I think I am. But I'll admit, this isn't where I thought today was going to go. I let out a soft laugh, the tension between us easing just slightly as I leaned my forehead against his. You and me both. There was a beat of silence, one that felt less heavy now, more comfortable. His hands shifted slightly on my waist, his touch grounding in a way that made my racing thoughts slow for just a moment. But then his expression turned thoughtful, his brows knitting together like he was trying to piece together a puzzle. I don't want to ruin this, he said finally, his voice steady despite the uncertainty in his eyes. I don't know what this means or where we go from here, but I don't want this to be something we regret. I reached up, my fingers brushing lightly against his cheek. The gesture was instinctive, but it felt right, like it was the only way I could convey what I was feeling. I don't think I could ever regret this, I said, my voice trembling slightly. You mean too much to me for that. He closed his eyes for a moment, exhaling a breath that seemed to carry some of the tension from his shoulders. You mean a lot to me too, he said softly. More than I think I realized until now. His words settled over me like a warm blanket, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I allowed myself to believe that maybe this wasn't just a fleeting moment. Maybe this was something real, something worth holding on to. I think we spent too much time overthinking things, I said, a small, hesitant smile tugging at my lips. Maybe we just need to stop worrying about what this means and figure it out as we go. His smile widened, and he let out a quiet laugh. His forehead pressed lightly against mine again. You're probably right. You always are. I rolled my eyes, my smile turning playful despite the whirlwind of emotion still swirling inside me. Don't get used to hearing that. He laughed again, the sound lighter this time, and the tension between us seemed to dissipate a little more. For the first time since this all began, it felt like we could breathe again, like we were finding our footing in this uncharted territory. But the moment of calm didn't last long. His hands shifted, sliding up to my back as he pulled me closer. His lips brushed against mine in a kiss that was slower, more deliberate. It wasn't the rushed, heated connection of before. It was something deeper, more meaningful. His touch was gentle, his movements unhurried, like he was savoring every second. My hands found their way to his shoulders, then his chest, feeling the warmth of his skin through the fabric of his shirt. The steady thrum of his heartbeat beneath my fingertips was grounding, a reminder that this was real, that we were here together. The kiss deepened, and I felt myself melting into him, every doubt and insecurity fading away in the face of the connection we shared. It was overwhelming in the best way, like everything I'd ever wanted but never allowed myself to hope for was suddenly within reach. But then, just as quickly as it had started, he pulled back slightly, his breathing heavy as he rested his forehead against mine once more. We should probably stop, he said, though his hand stayed firmly on my back, holding me close. Yeah, I agreed, though neither of us made any move to step away. The space between us felt charged, like a magnet pulling us back together, no matter how much we tried to resist. He chuckled softly, his hand sliding back down to my waist as he took a small step back. This is going to take some getting used to, he said. I nodded, my chest still heaving as I tried to catch my breath. Yeah, but I think it's worth it. His smile softened, and he reached up to brush a strand of hair out of my face, his touch lingering just a little longer than necessary. So do I. The locker room suddenly felt smaller, the air between us heavy with the weight of everything that had just happened. And yet, there was a strange sense of peace in the moment, a quiet understanding that we didn't have to have all the answers right now. For a while, we just stood there, the silence between us filled with unspoken promises and the faint hum of the fluorescent lights above. It wasn't perfect and it wasn't clear where this would lead, but in that moment, none of it mattered. All that mattered was that we were here together, and that for the first time, it felt like everything was exactly as it should be. In the days that followed, everything felt different, yet somehow the same. We had always been close, But now there was this new layer to our connection, a quiet, unspoken acknowledgement of what had happened in the locker room. It was as if the air between us had shifted, and every interaction carried a weight that hadn't been there before. At first, I wasn't sure how to navigate this new dynamic. Part of me wanted to talk about it, to dissect every moment of what had happened and figure out what it all meant. But another part of me, the larger part, was terrified of ruining whatever fragile understanding we'd stumbled into. So I kept quiet, and he did too. And we fell into a strange kind of rhythm. We still hung out like we always did, spending hours playing video games, grabbing food, or just sitting around talking about nothing and everything. But now there are these moments, small, fleeting touches, or lingering glances that hinted at something more. Like when his hand would brush against mine, and neither of us would pull away, or when his gaze would linger on me just a little too long, a small smile tugging at his lips. It was confusing and exhilarating all at once, and I found myself constantly second-guessing what he was thinking, what he wanted. Did he see this as just a one-time thing, a fluke born out of a moment of vulnerability? Or was there something real between us, something worth exploring? I didn't have to wonder for long. One night, about a week after the locker room, he showed up at my place unannounced. It wasn't unusual for him to drop by, but there was something about the way he stood in the doorway, his hands shoved deep into his pockets, and a nervous energy radiating off him, that made my stomach flip. "Hey," he said, his voice soft as he glanced up at me. "Can we talk?" I nodded, stepping aside to let him in. He didn't head for the couch like he usually did, though. Instead, he hovered near the door, his eyes darting around the room like he was searching for the right words. "I've been thinking," he started, his voice hesitant. "About us. About what happened." My heart pounded in my chest as I forced myself to stay calm, to let him speak without jumping to conclusions. "I don't know what this is," he admitted, running a hand through his hair. "But I know I can't stop thinking about it. About you." I stared at him, my mind racing as I tried to process what he was saying. "Hey, he held up a hand, cutting me off. "Just let me finish, okay?" He took a deep breath, his gaze meeting mine. "I've spent a lot of time trying to figure out who I am, what I want. And honestly, I still don't have all the answers. But I know that when I'm with you, everything feels right. Like it just makes sense." His words hit me like a tidal wave, washing away every doubt and insecurity I've been holding on to. "I feel the same way," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "But I don't want you to feel pressured," or he interrupted, stepping closer. "This isn't about pressure or expectations. This is about me wanting to be honest with you and with myself." He reached out his hand, brushing against mine, and the warmth of his touch sent a shiver down my spine. "I don't know where this will lead," he said, his voice steady now, "but I want to find out with you." Tears pricked at the corners of my eyes, and I felt a smile break across my face. "I'd like that," I said, my voice trembling. "I'd like that a lot." His smile widened, and for the first time in days, I felt a sense of calm settle over me. We didn't have all the answers, and there were still so many unknowns, but we were in this together, and that was enough. Over the next few weeks, we navigated this new chapter of our relationship with cautious optimism. We didn't tell anyone, at least not yet. It wasn't out of shame or fear. It was just something we wanted to figure out on our own, without the pressure of outside opinions or expectations. We spent more time together than ever, falling into a routine that felt both familiar and brand new. There were still moments of doubt, of course. Times when I worried that this was all too good to be true, or that he would wake up one day and realize he'd made a mistake. But every time those thoughts crept in, he was there to reassure me, to remind me that this wasn't just some fleeting experiment. "I'm here," he'd say, his voice steady and certain. "I'm not going anywhere." And the intimacy between us deepened, not just physically, but emotionally as well. We talked about things we'd never talked about before, sharing our fears and dreams, and everything in between. It was like we were discovering new sides of each other, layers we hadn't even known existed. One night, as we lay side by side on my couch, he turned to me, his expression thoughtful. "You know," he said, his voice quiet, "I never thought I'd find myself here. But now that I am, I can't imagine being anywhere else." I smiled, my chest swelling with warmth as I reached for his hand. Me neither. And in that moment, I knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, we'd face them together. Because this wasn't just some impulsive decision or fleeting attraction. This was something real, something worth fighting for. This was us. If you like this story, give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button for more emotional, romantic, and heart-wrenching LGBT stories. Don't forget to drop a comment below and share your thoughts on this unexpected twist. See you in the next video.